Hi, I'm Alise Japens with the Dominion Post and MacGuffin Meaning, and I'm here today with Shannon Walsh, the director of the documentary Adrianne and the Castle that just premiered at Fantasia Festival. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Shannon. I
Oh,
appreciate
it's
it.
my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, how did you stumble across the story of Alan and Adrianne and Haven Crest and that whole thing?
Yeah, so my best friend, who's also the co-creator and co-writer, Laurel Sprengelmeyer, actually grew up in the neighboring town to Savannah, where Haven Crest Castle is. And her sister and family had heard about this kind of castle on the hill with this like reclusive couple. And Alan actually opens the castle a couple of months a year that you can come and see it. So they ended up going to see it. And after they went to the castle, she like immediately called me and was like, Shannon, you really want to check this out, and there might be a film that you want to make here. So yeah, it was a very family affair. It started with friendship and family and kind of continued that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so much of, this whole film just focuses on that. I think as I was watching it, I just kept waiting, I think, for the other shoe to drop at some point, like what kind of expose, what kind of horrible thing happened. And of course, there's tragedy in this, but not in the love story. Can you just talk some about that? Because, oh, I loved that so much about this.
Yeah, I think even when I first heard about the story and started meeting with Alan, like I realized I was like really cynical, like I think
Yeah.
most of us are. We're just like, yeah, right. No way. There's got to be something. And it was really such a beautiful experience. And I feel like it's reflected in the film that, like, this idea of having a world, a fantasy world, it may be, but a world in which you can really build your own reality and have true love, like a true and lasting love is possible, and also to be your authentic self and to be creative in that way. And so yeah, there was just something so I think life affirming, and I feel it's in the film as well about seeing people who really they mean what they say and they live this like actually really beautiful world. And it's not without its weirdnesses or its problems and whatnot. It's not perfect, but it certainly gave me a renewed sense of optimism and a kind of hopefulness somehow and a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that is true. I also tend to lean into cynicism, and it was just so beautiful to watch this and just see this couple that, yeah, just lived so much of their life. Um, One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was that you chose to have to cast a young Alan and Adrian in this and kind of give it that aspect to show their past. Can you talk about that decision and why you went that way?
Yeah, so the film was, took a lot of writing and thinking about how do we tell a story that's happened in the past, and there's a lot of interesting elements, but how do we make a film out of it? And also, as a doc maker who's done a lot of social issues films, like I think a lot about collaboration, responsibility, like what do we do when we engage people in the filmmaking, like real people in the filmmaking process? And it felt like obviously Alan's carrying so much grief, and that's such a big part of his life and the legacy of their story. And so I was really thinking about how do I carry him through an experience. And yeah, this idea of taking what they had written. So it's actually everything that you see is based on writings that they did,
Mm.
the way that they've told their own story, and also everything was collaborative with Alan. And I thought this idea of re-inhabiting one's own memories as a way to interview, to participate in telling. So not so much a recreation for the audience, but for Alan to
Mm.
be able to kind of re-inhabit the world that he and Adrian built so beautifully together was kind of the motivating impetus for bringing in the actors and bringing in all of these kind of creative elements that were such a part of their story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was kind of interesting. We talked, you saw Tamsin, I believe is her name, who played young Adrian, and she
Slee,
was
actually.
just,
It's actually Slee. Savannah.
oh, I'm
Slee is
sorry.
actually his name. That's okay. Tamsin was also one of the, but Slee is the main actress. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And she just was so deeply affected by Adrian's life and some of the writing. Can you talk about just, yeah, how their story affected you and, as a person and also as a filmmaker, like how would that change filmmaking going forward for you?
Oh yeah, and I love that question because it's like even obvious in the film, obviously. Like to me, this was a life-changing film and a
Yeah.
life-changing experience too, and it's definitely career-changing in terms of how I make films. This is my sixth feature, so I'm not like a first-time filmmaker.
Mhm.
But encountering Alan and Adrianne and their really creative people, like really, the heart, really artistic people, for better or worse, whether you like what they do or not, they lived a creative reality and really just owned it. And Adrianne, specifically was just so much exactly who she was. And she, in the 70s and 80s, like what that would have meant to
Mhm.
be totally yourself and all of its flamboyance and your kind of non-traditional, like so many things about her are non-traditional. And instead of, hiding that away, she leaned right in. And it was really interesting as we were casting for the film, not only with Slee, but with other actresses who came out, so many tears, so many just like this door that opens that says that something with Adrian tells us like just be yourself. And it's like, oh my God, I didn't know I needed to hear that. I didn't know that I wasn't doing that in the
Mm.
way that somehow Adrian makes so obvious to all of us. And so it was so moving, working with the actresses, working with everyone who encountered their story, the crew, all of us were really like transported into thinking about where are we at in our lives? How do we live our authentic lives? But also, like, where are we hiding and where might
Mm.
we be more who we are and just accept and love that? And that's such a beautiful part of, I think, what the legacy Adrian has left us.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think as I was kind of thinking about the film after I watched it, it's this really interesting, I think it gives us a really interesting picture of feminism, because I think sometimes you kind of think you have a one picture of what it is to be feminist. And here you have Adrienne, and she's very like leans into like femininity in a very, ostentatious kind of way. I mean, when Alan's pulling out and he's like, oh, you could try on this caftan or this, and she just has this, but it's this incredible, she's wholly herself. And I think that's really interesting. Did you kind of encounter that as well? Yeah, in the
Oh
filming.
yeah, they're sort of performing aristocracy camp, like definitely you've got this like kitsch, like, and it's all kind of mixed. I mean, there's, Adrienne, you can actually go on Haven Crest website and find some of her writing. She wrote a book of etiquette, like leaning into this almost 1920s, 30s kind of like what that all looks like, but also bringing it in such a camp way. And also, yeah, like a hyper feminized, like a very, trying, performing a kind of femininity. She was really into Julie Andrews and, like the kind of divas of the early cinema period, like those kind of starlets. And yeah, and I think it is true that, something about her also understanding, I think she had this, you can be divine and beautiful no matter what. There's something in that feels, yeah, like almost it is a kind of a feminist. It's a kind of yeah, like that there, no matter how you choose to present yourself, you can totally hold that space. And I think it was very ahead of her time, I mean, at that era. Yeah, I mean, I feel like she fits in really well today, and I hope viewers get a chance to see the film because I think young people today will go, okay, yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. Yeah, she feels like somebody who could like fit in like with the drag scene almost to some
Totally,
degree. Like that was kind
absolutely,
of the vibe I
absolutely.
got from it, was just,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I feel it. Yeah, and she's kind of pulling on all those kinds of references. She often described herself as a cross between Elizabeth Taylor and Phyllis Diller. Like old, like if we have a little like a signal to Elizabeth Taylor because that was a reference of hers in the film and whatnot. And yeah, I think she fits really into that whole iconography. And yet she was sort of separate from it herself. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting. But yeah, it was one of her personas for sure.
Yeah. So can you just talk about filming in the castle? I mean, we're talking, this is an enormous space. I think I was reading on their website that has like 63 rooms or something. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, can you just talk about like
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an enormous
totally.
space, and yet, like, and the thing that people don't really realize is that it's also, created by people who didn't really have a lot of money. So
Hmm.
it's quite like compact. It's like crazy and also quite compact, and has yeah, like when we first went there, and I totally encourage people to visit the castle. It's so interesting to see, but it's just packed with all of this ornate kind of artistic like love story stuff, and we're like, how are we going to film this place, right? And yeah, and there's lots of rooms that you don't see in the film and everything, but I really leaned into this kind of old school. I was inspired by films like Last Year at Marienbad from like the early French cinema that did these like castles, to really take the castle seriously as castle, and
Hmm.
play with that language in cinema, even though in a way they're like really on the kitsch side, but instead of to just go with like the choir and angelic singing that they wanted it to get to, even if in a way it's a kind of halfway space between here and there, but it is a magical place. And you'd think a space like that might be a little creepy or strange, but in fact it's been built with so much love that it feels lovely to be in there, and it's a really interesting, one of a kind place.
Yeah. So I saw in one scene Alan's like painting. Is he like still creating art for the
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I mean, what he says is like, I mean, Adrian died in 2006, but they had many plans for the house still. So
Mhm.
a huge amount of what you see when you visit now has been made since she died. And
Wow.
he's trying to fulfill all the plans that they had
Mhm.
together and continue to build out like what the world was that they had planned to do. Yeah, so he's just a prolific artist. You blink and he's made another painting, and he's just such a talented and kind of yeah, like hardworking artist.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it really does. You sit and you look at his biography. It's an artist and a writer and a filmmaker, and he's done so many things. Is that like intimidating to go in as also a filmmaker and kind of interact with somebody who is also an artist? Was there any kind of like push and pull
Oh
there?
no, it was such
Okay.
a joy. Like, I mean,
That's
it's a documentary filmmaker's dream for sure, because Alan was just so game for like, what he encouraged me to imagine, hey, like, what if we bring like that the sky's the limit. We can make a
Mhm.
musical, we can bring mascots and we can dance. Like that the only limit is the imagination. He really feels like this kind of Willy Wonka meets Walt Disney meets like Houdini kind of figure. And it's like he's just like, okay, here's the magical world. And we'd be like, what about this? Would you want to do that? And he'd like, okay, let's do it. That's a great idea. And so he was so game. And so we collaborated so much with him. And that was just so special to meet someone like him and be able to like work with them. But he's really like people, he's done all this stuff, but he's in his own little bubble.
Mhm.
People don't really know about him, and this is kind of his first big exposure to the world. And same with Adrian. Like, to me, she should have been famous, and yet she's totally unknown. And all of the films she made and everything are pretty much unknown. No one's really heard of
Right.
either of them.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Can you talk some about just the reception that you've received? I think the film premiered the other day at Fantasia. Can you
Yeah.
talk about, just how people are reacting to it and all
Yeah.
of that? Yeah.
So we did our world premiere at South by Southwest. So we've just been unveiling, and Fantasia was just a totally dream festival to play at. I've always loved the festival, and to play a genre festival as a doc is just so cool as well. And yeah, we've just had like incredible response from audiences. People are just, it's a real, you'd think it's sort of like a weird story, but actually it's a very human story about love and about grief that I think a lot of people don't even expect that they're going to relate to as much. So, you cry, you laugh, and people have just been really moved, and I think kind of obsessed with their story and with also the way the documentary was made, which is, I think, a really unique take. It's a
Mhm.
kind of Russian doll type of doc where you kind of keep realizing there's yet another layer, and there's a lot of mystery and doors that aren't opened and questions that remain unanswered, and playing with this idea of representation that they very much, I think, leaned into in the way lived their life. And yeah, I was saying we had these little fans of Adrianne at the screening, and you know, just to bring her, because we bring her always with us as well, and you know, to bring the audience into the story.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I absolutely loved this film. It was beautiful. Yeah, I can't wait. And it made me very excited to try to plan a trip to to see Haven Crest because I would love, yeah, it's amazing.
It's a bucket list. Like you got to
Yeah.
do it. You know, he opens in October. It's October and May are the
Right.
months. Yeah, you saw on the website, I imagine. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely worth a trip to Savannah.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time to
Yeah.
speak with me today, for making this beautiful film. And just, yeah, I wish you well going
Thank you
forward.
so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Bye.